Well, we've heard from state and federal agencies. Now we're going to listen to a couple speakers from The Ohio State University. First, Peter Thomison is going to talk about, he's an agronomist, and he's going to talk about the potential for corn and soybean yields. Correct?
Yes. Appreciate the opportunity to participate in this meeting, Director Zehringer. I'm here with several of my counterparts from OSU Extension, in addition to Barry Ward up here. Harold Waters, who's the co-chair of our agronomy extension team, an ag educator in Champaign County. Don Brees, director of our ag and natural resources program, and Mark Schultz, who is a forage extension specialist and also is covering soybeans. I'm a corn extension specialist. I'm going to focus today on delayed planting effects on corn performance. We have a packet of information. I don't know if you grabbed one when you were coming in here, but it summarizes, gives you some background information on the crop situation, the field crop situation in Ohio. It also provides you with some resources and some decision aids that OSU Extension has been providing Ohio growers and businesses. With regard to delayed planting effects on corn, you know, the question that's been coming up a lot is what impacts as far as yield. Early in May, after the first week of May, we could be looking at about a bushel of corn per day, losing about a bushel per acre of corn a day. By the end of May, though, it may increase up to 2 bushels per acre per day. Now, having said that, there's a lot of variability. And if you see that handout, I think you can see a lot of variability in a chart I provided. Since 2005, I've been conducting trials looking at early and late planted corn. What I call early corn would be early May or late April, and then I've been doing studies looking at corn planted in early June. So it's kind of helpful information for a year of this kind. By early June, first week of June, up to about the middle of June. And in those years, if we look across the 11 test sites that I've conducted these in, we're looking at about a 16% yield reduction. But they vary tremendously. In some years, we've seen as much as a 43% yield reduction. That coincided with 2008 at our South Charleston location. What happened in 2008? Well, we had Hurricane Ike came through. And late planted corn is very susceptible to stock lodging, stock quality issues. On the other hand, we had a location up in Worcester in 2005, again an aberration. We actually had a 13% yield advantage associated with corn planted June 15th. And what happened in 2005, another hurricane event, it was Hurricane Katrina. Didn't hurt us, but actually it devastated New Orleans, of course, but it brought us some much needed moisture for our late planted corn. We even had organic corn that had over 200 bushels that year. So there's a lot of variation. There's nothing cast in concrete that says a late planted corn is going to yield dramatically lower than early planted corn. There's certainly a yield reduction associated with it, but it doesn't have to be devastating. If you look at the state yield trends that Jim Rainey provides, we always include in our newsletters the information from the state statistician to start these off, and they range, and I've sort of looked at the past 30 years. We've had 9 years, including 2011, where we've had late planted years. In 6 of those years, corn yields were below the trend line from 5 bushels per acre in 1995, and I think more of that had to do with gray leaf spot, which exploded that year, to 2002, where we saw a record low harvest of 88 bushels per acre. We think a lot of times in 1988 being our worst year, 86 bushels, but 2002 we had 88 bushels. What happened that year? The late planted corn crop, about 50% of our corn was not planted by the end of May. We were devastated by late season drought. So the questions, the comments people have made about drought is the really critical issue here. We can get away with late planted crops if we have good growing conditions in July and August. And that's certainly what happened in 2009. We don't think of 2009 as a late planted crop, but we had a significant percentage of acreage it constitutes. It's one of those late planted years. What happened in 2009? We had a record corn yield in 2009 of 174 bushels. So there's potential, if we get moderate temperatures, adequate rainfall, to still have a decent crop planted in late May or early June. Hopefully, and by the first week of June, we could still not see major yield losses. With regard to recommendations and extension that we've been making, we've been encouraging growers to minimize field operations that would preclude getting the crop planted. And I think that's, some people I think commented on that already. Forego some, maybe some nitrogen herbicide applications or fertility applications early on and focus more on getting the crop seeded. Maybe avoid certain practices like using a starter nitrogen program, which would be sort of unnecessary this late in the planting season. Certainly one of the major issues is switching hybrid maturities. We have a lot, we've done work in the past that demonstrates that we can probably stick with our adaptive hybrids in much of Ohio through the end of May. But we have 100 to 104-day hybrids that will certainly work in many parts of Ohio and are very competitive when it comes to yield. One of the other reasons we're sort of looking at that switching hybrid maturity is getting into the dry down situation. If we have a year like 2009, again, that was a year we had very good growing conditions, very good yields, but we also had a very slow harvest, and we had the specter of mycotoxins that year. So that's the flip side. If we get late season rain, that could delay us. So we're pushing lower seeding rates because we're not going to be seeing that as much of the response to high pine populations in this situation. And I think that we do have some benefits going in. Our hybrids are much better now than they were even 5 years ago. We have hybrids with, for example, transgenic BT hybrids provide us with protection for European corn borer, which is a problem in late planting situations. Just one example of how some of our cultural technologies have improved in recent years, and that should buffer us from major yield losses associated with planting dates if we get good weather conditions. I think I'll turn it over then to, I think one of the major issues, of course, right now is the economic issues, the budgets, looking at which crop to grow. I haven't focused on soybeans. Soybeans certainly benefit from early planting, but unlike that bushel, the 2 bushel yield loss per day that we're experiencing with corn, we're looking at more of a quarter of a bushel to a half a bushel day, loss per day with soybeans. And then we have preventive planting, and I'm going to let Barry Ward take over and give you some assessment of how that works.
Okay, thanks, Peter, and thanks, Director Zehringer, for inviting us here today to kind of give us some testimony and at least talk a little bit about some of the issues. And on the economic side, you know, it kind of goes hand in hand with the agronomics and trying to make assumptions, and that's what we try to do, is we try to model and evaluate what's going to happen from here on out. One of the things that we've done, that I did this last winter, was ask producers in the course of our policy and outlook meetings, have they ever recalled a period of time in their lifetime that we've had economic profitability in the crop production sector as we've seen the last 4 years? You know, I didn't get very many like periods shouted out. One of the periods that was mentioned was the mid-1970s when we had some good profitability. And the other one was one of my colleagues, Carl Zuloff, who some of you know, mentioned just after World War II. And I don't think he really remembers that period, but he's done a lot of history. And so I guess that's one of the positives coming into this kind of dreadful planting season, is we've had, at least in most of the states, most of Ohio, we've had fairly decent prospects for profitability the last 4 years. That's showing up in balance sheets for most of our farmers, maybe not livestock producers, but some of our crop producers in the state of Ohio, is that we're coming into this period, this year, relatively strong and strengthened in terms of our financial standing. So, and I know one of the NASS reports that I've just recently read indicates that at least 2011, the forecast was the second highest inflation-adjusted value for net farm income coming into this year. That was the prediction. The top 5 earning years for the past 3 decades have occurred since 2004. So this past 4 or 5 year period, at least the potential has been there for producers to gain some strength in their balance sheet. So I guess that's the good news. Okay, now on to the bad news as we start to evaluate what's going to happen economically. We've done some preliminary work in terms of our crop production budgets and tried to evaluate how they're going to differ in this, you know, if we do get this dry spell in this early part of June and we're able to plant. We have put together a decision aid that's an Excel spreadsheet that evaluates returns above variable costs for corn, soybeans, and then comparing that to a preventive planting type of a payment. So that's the analysis that I think most producers, and I know that Representative Peterson mentioned this, that producers are doing this on a daily basis, looking at what's going on in the markets, corn, soybean prices and how they're fluctuating, and trying to evaluate what is my best decision I talked to a good producer yesterday, a good friend of mine, that indicated that his decision was going to be fairly easy as far as an economic decision come June 5th. If he's not having all of his corn acres planted, he was going to definitely take a preventative planting if he was just looking strictly at the base economics. Because it played out for him that was going to be the best decision. Now there's several other factors that are going to come into that, and some of those he was trying to evaluate, and I'll go through those here in just a moment. But as I mentioned earlier, the decision aid, that's an Excel spreadsheet producers can download. It evaluates returns above variable costs for those crops. And also, we put up some additional enterprise budgets that at least take a stab at what's going to happen with corn and soybeans if we do plant those in this next week. And it's going to take a look at some of the yield decreases that our agronomists are saying historically have occurred. And that may not happen. You may have, as was mentioned earlier, on a field-by-field basis and with newer genetics, we may have better prospects for these late plantings than what we're used to. So as we evaluate those, we've got some late planting budgets on our website that you can download and take a look at. Those will enable you to put your own numbers in and try to do some evaluation on corn versus soybeans versus prevented plantings. Now,